Picture this, a sellout crowd at a football or baseball stadium. Nearly 72,000 people standing, waving, cheering. Now imagine all of those people dead. 72,000 is the number of Americans who died from drug overdoses in 2017, with over half of those deaths being attributed to opioids. The United States is in the midst of an opioid epidemic. As many as 1 in 4 patients that receive long-term opiate therapy will eventually struggle with addiction. Most pharmacies fill at least 200 opioid prescriptions per day, and from 2010 to 2017, U.S. pharmacies filled almost 1.9 billion. While many people use their prescriptions responsibly, others abuse them or they sell them to other people that will. Furthermore, dependency on prescription opiates is a direct route to illegal street drugs like heroin. Now, in my early 20s, I struggled with addiction to Oxycontin, and eventually that led me to heroin. So for this speech, I've not only read about specific statistics and problems that surround this issue, I've also lived them firsthand. Prescription opiates are useful for treating intense chronic pain, but should be reserved only for the most serious cases. First, I'm going to explain why opiates become such a widespread problem. Secondly, I'll present solutions that will begin to address this issue. Third, I'll describe how the world would improve without prescription opioid abuse. And lastly, I'll give you some simple ways that you can help end this epidemic. As a society, there's a significant need to take prescription medication seriously, especially opiates. Whether we're talking about Vicodin or heroin, opiates are unbelievably addictive. In fact, 4 out of 5 of those addicted to heroin say that they started originally by abusing prescription medications. Current national trends indicate that more people die each year from overdoses, the majority of which is opioid drugs, than died in the entirety of the Vietnam War, the Korean War, or any armed conflict since the end of World War II. In the late 1990s, pharmaceutical companies reassured the medical community that patients would not become addicted to prescription opioid pain relievers, and healthcare providers began to prescribe them at greater rates. Prescriptions for opiates averaged around 2 million new users per year up to the year 2012. During that same period, Vicodin use doubled, oxycodone use increased 5-fold, and opiate overdose deaths increased 4-fold. There's a false sense of security given when a doctor writes you a prescription. We believe that the drug must be safe, and even if we're aware of the dangers, we believe it will never happen to us. For me and probably many others, addiction can feel like a whirlpool. You're safe as long as you stay around the edges, but once you get too close to the middle, you lose control and get sucked down. Not only is this a serious national crisis that affects public health, it also affects economic welfare. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that the total economic burden of prescription opioid misuse alone in the United States is $78.5 million per year. That includes the cost of health care, lost productivity, addiction treatment, and criminal justice involvement. So even if you're not directly affected by your own addiction or that of a friend or family member, you are affected indirectly by paying for the fallout of overprescribing and abusing the addiction that follows. While confronting the opioid epidemic is no small task, there are some solutions. The first and most important step in fighting opiate abuse may also be the hardest, because society in the United States has been conditioned to take a pill for everything. As Americans, we have a problem with pain and a love of prescription painkillers. In 2015, the number of opioids prescribed was enough for every American to be medicated for 3 weeks. The overprescribing of prescription medication needs to be controlled, with both doctors and patients being educated on alternative pain management solutions. Secondly, when opiates are necessary, they should be prescribed for shorter periods and for lower doses. Our bodies like opiates and they begin to expect them at specific time intervals, and this increases our dependence on them. It can also lead to an increased tolerance where you'll require more and more of the drug. Prolonged opiate use can also lead and actually cause chronic pain because your body stops producing its own endorphins. Another way that we can help stop this is to dispose of unused medications to remove the temptation for you or someone else to abuse them. 2/3 of teens report getting prescription drugs from family or friends. Lastly, we need to begin treating addiction more as a disease and less like a personal choice. The sense of isolation that individuals and families feel when struggling with addiction is immense, and we must change that by speaking out and ending the stigma of addiction. By adopting a more aggressive approach to fighting opioid abuse, we could save lives and improve the well-being of society as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, over half of all drug overdoses are from opiates. Over 47,000 deaths in 2017 alone. Those 47,000 people could potentially be alive today, and 47,000 families would not still be suffering if not for the opioid epidemic. Healthcare costs would also be lower. Opiate abuse is responsible for almost $80 billion of economic burden that falls mostly on taxpayers. Crime would go down substantially. About 70% of state prisoners and 57% of federal prisoners used drugs before they were incarcerated. Many of the reasons behind crime, like murder, robbery, assault, it all falls on the shoulders of drug abuse. Family violence would also go down. Child abuse and neglect are often directly related to drug abuse among parents or guardians who use. In a world without drug abuse, violence among families, both domestic and child abuse, would all decrease. Now, the opioid epidemic will not end anytime soon, but there are some simple ways that we can all help solve the problem. Be your own advocate when discussing surgeries or pain management with your doctor. Discuss your concerns about developing dependencies on opioid medications, and also explore alternative treatments, such as physical therapy, anti-inflammatory drugs, or topical anesthetics. Anti-inflammatories like Tylenol can be far more effective at managing pain, and non-opiate drugs like Toradol have been proven to be much more effective than morphine when used in the same doses. Third, dispose of all unused medications. This will remove the temptation for you or anyone else in your house to misuse the medications. And there's also drop boxes that can be found at most pharmacies, fire stations, or police stations. Lastly, just be aware. Addiction doesn't just affect a certain social group or class. Prescription medications, especially opiates, are just as dangerous, if not more so, than illegal street drugs. Throughout the last several minutes, I've told you why opiate abuse is such a problem, what we need to do as a society to start the change, and also what you can do on a personal level to protect yourself. I realize comparing prescription opiates to heroin or other illegal drugs may seem like a stretch to some of you. However, the difference is not as large as you may think. Synthetic opiates like Vicodin, Percocet, Oxycontin are addictive. They're being used by millions of Americans right now, and they don't understand how addictive and how destructive these drugs are. Opiates should only be used in the most extreme cases. We need to end the overprescribing and the overuse of these drugs and continue to educate both patients and healthcare providers about the possible dangers. Remember, 1 in 4 people prescribed opiates for pain management will become dependent. Please, for your safety, talk to your physician about how you plan to manage your pain and dispose of any unused medication for the temptation it poses. Anyone can fall into the vicious cycle of addiction. Thanks.